This story is a work of fiction, a dramatized narrative inspired by themes of legacy, silence, and the hidden cost of fame. It is not presented as historical fact. Some secrets aren't hidden because they're shameful. They're hidden because they're powerful. I didn't plan for mine to survive me. In fact, I did everything I could to make sure it wouldn't. I buried it beneath schedules, applause, obligations, and the kind of smiles that convince the world you're stronger than you feel. I told myself that if I kept singing, if I kept moving, if I kept being what everyone needed me to be, the truth would stay quiet. Didn't. There was a moment, long before anyone noticed I was slowing down, when I understood that not all secrets are meant to be carried forever. Some of them grow heavy. They press against your ribs when you breathe. They whisper at night when the house is finally still, reminding you that silence is not the same thing as peace. I had lived my life in full view of millions, yet the most important part of me existed entirely unseen. The world heard my voice, analyzed my choices, judged my failures, celebrated my triumphs. But they never knew what I was protecting. Or who. This secret wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a crime. It wasn't even something the world would immediately understand. That's why it was dangerous. Because once found, it would change how everything else was seen. The songs, the struggles, the strength people thought they understood. It would force questions no one had ever thought to ask. And it would reveal how carefully my story had been edited, not just by others, but by me. I didn't write it down. I didn't confess it out loud. I didn't trust it to paper or tape or prayer. I trusted it to time. And time has a way of betraying even the best intentions. The closer I came to the end, the more I sensed it. That faint pressure in the air, like something waiting to be discovered. People around me called it intuition. Others called it paranoia. But I knew the difference. This wasn't fear of death. This was fear of being finally understood. Because once the secret surfaced, there would be no undoing it. No softening its edges. No controlling how people reacted to it. The truth doesn't ask permission before it rearranges everything. I told myself I was ready. I wasn't. And when the first crack appeared, small, almost invisible, I realized too late that the secret I thought I had buried was already finding its way back to the surface. Not because someone went looking for it, but because some truths refused to stay lost. And when mine was finally found, it would shock everyone, not for what it revealed, but for how long it had been hiding in plain sight. The secret didn't arrive suddenly. It wasn't born from a single mistake or a dramatic moment the way people like to imagine these things. It grew slowly, quietly, over years of learning how much of myself the world was allowed to see, and how much had to remain hidden to survive. By the time I understood what I was protecting, it was already too late to pretend it didn't exist. I remember the exact place where the weight of it first settled into my chest. A hotel room in Los Angeles, curtains drawn against the morning sun, the city humming below like it always did. Indifferent, relentless. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in my hand, staring at a message I hadn't answered for days. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I knew exactly what it would cost if I did. Fame teaches you early that privacy is a luxury, not a right. Every relationship becomes a potential headline. Every decision becomes evidence. People stop asking who you are and start deciding for you. Somewhere along the way, I learned that silence could be safer than truth. That morning I chose silence. Felt temporary then. Manageable. Like something I could carry quietly without it changing the shape of my life. I told myself I was protecting others. Protecting my career. Protecting the fragile balance that kept everything standing. But secrets don't stay small. They grow teeth. On stage nothing changed. The lights still came up. The band still waited for my cue. When I sang, the world still believed every word I gave them. Love, longing, devotion, heartbreak. I delivered it flawlessly. That was the irony. I could sing about honesty while hiding the most honest thing about myself. Backstage, though, the pressure was constant. Managers spoke in cautious tones. Assistants avoided certain topics without being told to. Conversations shifted when I entered rooms. No one said anything directly, they never needed to. Everyone could feel it. Something unspoken had taken up space. One night, after a show that should have left me energized, I sat alone in my dressing room long after everyone else had gone. Makeup wipes scattered across the counter. The mirror lights buzzed faintly, casting a harsh glow over my reflection. I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked tired, though I was, but because I looked divided. Like a woman split between who she was allowed to be and who she actually was. I pressed my palms flat against the counter and leaned forward, breathing slowly. "How long do you think you can keep this up?" I whispered to my reflection. It didn't answer. The secret followed me everywhere after that. Into rehearsals. Into interviews. Into moments that should have felt intimate but never quite did. I found myself measuring my words more carefully, choosing phrasing that left room to retreat. The people closest to me noticed. "You've been distant," someone said to me once, their voice gentle but searching. "I'm just tired," I replied. That was true too. Lies are most convincing when they carry pieces of truth. What scared me wasn't that someone would find out accidentally. It was that if the secret came out, it would be taken out of my hands entirely, reshaped, reinterpreted, turned into something loud and ugly and unrecognizable. This wasn't something I could explain in a soundbite. It wasn't something that fit neatly into redemption arcs or cautionary tales. It was complicated, human, and the world has very little patience for either. I considered telling someone, really telling them, sitting across from a person I trusted and letting the words exist in the open air. I rehearsed the conversations in my head, imagining relief on the other side. But every version ended the same way, with consequences I couldn't control. So I did what I had always done best. I performed. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed when expected. I gave interviews that said everything and nothing at the same time. I convinced myself that as long as the music remained powerful, the truth could stay quiet. Until the day it didn't. It happened in the most ordinary way possible. Question asked too casually. Pause that lasted half a second too long. A look exchanged between two people who thought I wasn't watching. That's when I felt it, the shift. The secret hadn't been discovered, but it had been suspected. And suspicion is more dangerous than knowledge. Because once people start guessing, they don't wait for answers. They create their own. That night, alone again, I sat at a small desk and opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years. I didn't know what I was writing yet. I just knew I couldn't keep carrying this without leaving some trace of my own version behind. Not for the world. For the truth. My hand hovered over the page as a thought surfaced that made my chest tighten. What if the secret wasn't meant to be hidden forever, but meant to be found only after I was gone? The idea terrified me. Because if that were true, then every day I stayed silent wasn't protection. It was preparation. And as I closed the notebook and turned off the light, one certainty settled over me with chilling clarity. If this secret ever surfaced, it wouldn't just change how people saw me. It would force them to question everything they thought they knew. And someone somewhere was already getting too close. Once suspicion enters a room, it never leaves quietly. I felt it everywhere after that night. Not as an accusation, not yet, but as a presence. A subtle shift in the way people listened to me. The way questions lingered a fraction longer than they should have. The way silence started to feel loaded instead of peaceful. The secret hadn't been named, but it had been sensed. And sensing is enough to make people dangerous. The following weeks moved faster than I wanted them to. Meetings stacked on top of rehearsals. Rehearsals bled into interviews. Interviews blurred into obligations that required me to be present while remaining invisible. I said yes to everything because saying no would invite scrutiny. Control, I had learned, often masquerades as cooperation. During one interview, a journalist leaned forward slightly, voice smooth, almost friendly. "You've always been very private about certain parts of your life," he said. "Do you ever feel like you owe your fans more honesty?" The question was casual. The intent was not. I smiled, the practiced kind that softened tension without revealing anything. I give my fans honesty through my music, I replied. That's where I tell the truth best. He nodded, satisfied on the surface. But his eyes told a different story. He was listening for cracks. Afterward, my publicist praised my composure. You handled that beautifully, she said, relieved. There's been curiosity lately. Curiosity. Another harmless word that rarely is. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. The air itself carried the message. Something about me had shifted in the collective imagination, and people were trying to figure out what shape that shift took. That night I went home early. I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't feel like a stage. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window, watching headlights slide through the darkness below. From up there the city looked calm, ordered, predictable. Nothing like the storm inside me. I thought about the secret. Not what it was, but what it represented. It wasn't just information. It was context. It explained choices that had never made sense to anyone else. It reframed moments the public had judged harshly. It carried a truth that didn't fit into the neat boxes people preferred. That was the danger. Truth that complicates narratives is often treated as betrayal. I went to the desk and opened the notebook again. I read what I'd written the night before. The words felt raw, unfinished. Like the beginning of a confession that didn't yet know its destination. I added more. Not explanations. Not defenses. Memories. Moments I had never spoken about. Decisions I made quietly. The reasons behind silences people mistook for distance or weakness. I wrote not to justify myself, but to anchor the truth somewhere outside my body. Because carrying it alone was becoming unbearable. The next day, something happened that confirmed my instincts. I was in a rehearsal space when one of the producers pulled me aside. His tone was gentle, apologetic. Always a bad sign. There's some concern from the top, he said. They're wondering if now is the right time for you to take on so much. I stared at him. I've handled more than this my entire career. He nodded quickly. Of course. This isn't about ability. It's about perception. There it was again. Perception. Perception of what? Asked. He hesitated just long enough to answer without answering. Of where you're at. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That afternoon, a meeting I'd been scheduled for was quietly postponed. No explanation. Just a reschedule that never got rescheduled. Later, an appearance was cancelled, due to logistics. Logistics don't usually come with nervous voices. By evening I understood what was happening. The secret hadn't been exposed, but it had been flagged. And when powerful people flag something, they don't wait for confirmation. They prepare for containment. I called someone I trusted. One of the few people who knew me before fame had taught everyone else how to speak around me. Do you feel it? I asked without greeting. Yes, they replied immediately. I was hoping you were imagining it. So was I said quietly. Whitney, they continued carefully. When people start asking questions they don't have answers to, they usually decide the answers themselves. I know, I said. That's what scares me. That night, I dreamed of standing on a stage with no lights, singing into silence while an unseen audience whispered interpretations of every note. I woke up with my heart racing, the echo of voices still ringing in my ears. The secret was no longer just mine. It was becoming a void others wanted to fill. I sat up in bed and made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. If the truth was going to be discovered one day, it would not be discovered by accident. It would not be distorted beyond recognition. It would exist somewhere intact, untouched by speculation, protected from manipulation. That meant preparing it, preserving it. Not for now, for later. I stood, walked to the desk, and placed the notebook beside the letter I had begun to imagine but not yet fully commit to. Two pieces of the same truth, waiting for the right moment. As I closed the drawer, a thought struck me with unsettling clarity. What if the reason the secret felt so heavy now was because time was no longer on my side? What if it wasn't just suspicion that had entered the room, but urgency? And somewhere beyond my control, forces were already deciding when, not if, the truth would surface. Urgency has a sound. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It hums quietly beneath everything else, like electricity running through walls. Invisible, constant, impossible to ignore once you notice it. That was how the days began to feel. Charged. As if something unseen was moving closer, rearranging the air around me. I stopped trusting calm moments. They felt rehearsed. Every smile offered to me now carried an unspoken question behind it. Every compliment felt like a measurement. I'd spent years learning how to read rooms, but now the rooms were reading me back. One afternoon, during a routine wardrobe fitting, the stylist hesitated before adjusting my sleeve. Just a pause. Barely noticeable. "You okay?" she asked. "Yes," I answered automatically. She nodded, but her eyes lingered, searching. People had begun checking on me the way you check glass for cracks. Gently, carefully, already expecting to find something wrong. That night, I drove alone through streets I knew by heart. Windows down, music off. Silence had become my safest companion. I parked near the water and sat there for a long time. Hands resting on the steering wheel, watching reflections ripple and distort. I thought about how the secret had reshaped my life without ever being spoken. It had dictated where I stood in rooms, how close I let people get, which questions I answered honestly and which I danced around. It had protected me, yes, but it had also isolated me in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged. There is a cost to secrecy no one warns you about. Teaches you to disappear in pieces. I went home and pulled the notebook from the drawer again. This time I didn't write memories. I wrote consequences. What would happen if the truth came out now? Who would be hurt? Who would feel betrayed? Who would claim they had known all along? I wrote until my hand ached. Somewhere between sentences, I realized something that made my breath catch. The secret wasn't just about me anymore. It was about who benefited from it staying hidden. The industry loved silence. Silence could be shaped, managed. Silence left room for speculation that could be guided, monetized, softened or sharpened depending on need. Truth, on the other hand, arrived whole, uncooperative, impossible to fully contain. I understood then why the pressure felt different. This wasn't curiosity. It was resistance. The next morning confirmed it. I arrived at a scheduled meeting only to find it cancelled without warning. No one met my eyes when they told me. The explanation was vague, procedural. "We'll circle back," someone said. People always say that when they don't intend to. Later that day, a call came from someone whose voice I recognized instantly. Someone with influence, someone who rarely spoke without intent. "Whitney," they said warmly. "We're just checking in." "About what?" I asked. "About you," they replied. "We've noticed you've been introspective lately." I almost laughed. "And that's a problem?" I asked. "Not at all," they said quickly. "We just want to make sure you're supported." Support. Another word that rarely means what it pretends to. Supported how? I asked. Was carefully measured. By keeping things simple, they said. By not opening doors that don't need opening. Closed my eyes. "So you know," I said quietly. "I know enough," they replied. Enough to advise caution. When the call ended, my hands were shaking. Not because I felt threatened. Because I felt cornered. Someone, somewhere, had connected dots I thought were invisible. And they weren't asking me to confirm anything. They were asking me to stay quiet. That night I dreamed again. This time I was standing in a room filled with mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of me. Singer, daughter, icon, failure, survivor. I tried to speak, but every reflection spoke first, louder than me, drowning out my voice. I woke up gasping for air. I knew then that waiting was no longer an option. The secret had a gravity now. Pull. And gravity only increases the longer you resist it. I sat at the desk and began drafting something new. Not the letter, not the notebook. Something intentional. something designed not to explain but to exist. To stand on its own, untouched by interpretation. Record. Not public. Not yet. I didn't know when it would be needed. I only knew it would. As dawn crept through the window, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. But beneath it there was resolve. A sharp, steady clarity I hadn't felt in years. If the truth was going to be found someday, it would not be stripped of context. It would not be stolen. It would not be weaponized without resistance. I placed the new pages with the others, locking them away with a care that felt ceremonial. As I turned the key, a thought surfaced that sent a chill through me. What if the urgency I felt wasn't coming from outside pressure at all? What if it was coming from time itself? From the quiet knowledge that secrets don't just get discovered. They get outlived. And when they do, they no longer belong to you. The blow didn't come with drama. Came disguised as routine. I was preparing for a live performance that had been scheduled for months. One of those appearances that mattered more than anyone would admit. The kind where the room was filled with executives pretending to be invisible, critics pretending to be fair, and cameras pretending to capture only what was offered to them. Backstage smelled like hairspray and nerves. I sat in front of the mirror while hands adjusted my hair, my makeup, my dress. Everyone moved efficiently, professionally. Too professionally. No one joked. No one lingered. Conversations were clipped, eyes sliding away from mine as if eye contact itself carried risk. That was when I knew something was wrong. Not emotionally wrong. Structurally wrong. My manager stepped in, closing the door behind him with a softness that made the sound louder than a slam. He smiled, the kind of smile meant to calm, and immediately failed. "There's been a change," he said. I met his eyes in the mirror. "What kind of change?" He hesitated, then sighed. "They're adjusting the program. Shortening your set." My chest tightened. "Why?" "Timing," he said too quickly. "Network constraints." I turned fully in my chair. "That's not true." Silence. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit he never admitted to having. "Whitney, there are concerns." "Concerns about what?" I asked, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat on the edge of a table, leaning forward like someone about to deliver bad news they believed was unavoidable. "There are rumors," he said. "People asking questions. They think it might be better if you keep things lighter tonight." "Lighter than what?" "Yes, than the truth." He didn't say it, but the word hung between us like smoke. "So this is punishment," I said quietly. "No," he replied immediately. "Protection." There it was again. The lie dressed as concern. I stood smoothing my dress, feeling heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears, not yet, but something sharper. "You don't protect someone by shrinking them," I said. "You protect them by standing beside them." He looked away. That was the moment betrayal stopped being theoretical. Had a face. Minutes later, I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Two staff members speaking in hushed tones near the corridor, unaware I was just around the corner. "They're worried she'll say something," one whispered. "She won't," the other replied. "Not on stage." "I don't know," the first said. "People who feel cornered tend to talk." I stepped into view. They froze. "People who feel cornered tend to tell the truth," I said calmly. They apologized. Too fast. Too loud. Fear does that to voices. When I was finally alone, the weight of it all crashed down on me. This wasn't caution anymore. It was control. Someone had decided that my voice, the very thing that built my career, was now a liability. Not because I couldn't sing, but because I might mean something when I did. That realization hurt more than any headline ever had. As I waited to go on stage, a sudden panic swept through me. Not about performing, but about what might be taken next. Appearances. Opportunities. My credibility. My narrative. I thought about the documents locked away at home. The words I'd written in quiet defiance. The record I was building in secret. What if they were already trying to get to it? The thought made my stomach twist. Then came the worst part. 5 minutes before I was set to go on, a stage manager approached me, eyes darting. "There's been a technical issue," he said. "They're asking if you can lip-sync the first number." I laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "Absolutely not." He swallowed. "They're insisting." "They can insist all they want," I said. "I sing live. Or I don't sing at all." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll tell them." As he walked away, I understood the true nature of the threat. This wasn't about silencing a secret. It was about undermining my authority over my own voice. When I finally stepped onto the stage, the applause was thunderous, real, unfiltered. The crowd didn't know what was happening behind the curtain. They just knew I was there. And for a moment, standing in that light, I felt powerful again. Until I saw someone in the front row. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone whose presence meant lines had been crossed. They met my eyes and didn't look away. And in that instant, I realized the pressure hadn't peaked yet. It was only escalating. Because whatever I was protecting, someone else was now actively trying to uncover. And they were no longer hiding it. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It followed me off stage like a second shadow. Heavier, colder, impossible to shake. My body moved on instinct, accepting congratulations, nodding, smiling, while my mind stayed locked on that face in the front row. The one that didn't belong. The one that had watched me not as a fan, not as a critic, but as a collector watches something they believe is already theirs. Backstage, the energy was chaotic. People spoke over one another. Headsets buzzed. Someone knocked over a bottle of water and no one bothered to clean it up. Control had slipped and everyone felt it. I went straight to my dressing room and closed the door. Locked it. I sat down, breathing slowly, deliberately, the way I'd learned to do when panic tried to hijack my body. My hands were steady. My heart was not. There was a knock. 3 short taps. I didn't answer. "Whitney," a voice said through the door. Familiar. Careful. "We need to talk." I stood and opened it just enough to see who it was. An executive. A-level. Someone who usually sent messages through layers of people, not in person. "What do you want?" I asked. He glanced down the hallway, then back at me. "Privacy." I laughed once, humorless. "You're standing in front of my locked door. That's all the privacy you're getting." He nodded, accepting the boundary. "Someone is asking questions," he said. "Serious questions." "So I've noticed," I replied. "They've seen things," he continued. "Connected dots." "And?" "Yes. And they're not patient." There it was. Not curiosity. Not concern. "Rhett, you should let us help you manage this," he said. "Before it becomes something bigger." "By manage, you mean bury," I said. He didn't deny it. "By manage, I mean protect what you've built." "What I've built," I said slowly, "was built on my voice. My truth. You don't get to decide which parts of me are inconvenient." His jaw tightened. "Whitney, this could get ugly." "It already is," I replied. After he left, I sat back down and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back at me looked composed, regal even. But behind her eyes was fury. Not wild, focused. I knew then that something irreversible was coming. The kind of moment you can feel approaching in your bones. Where silence stops being neutral and starts being complicit. I left the venue early, taking a different exit, watching every car in my rearview mirror. Paranoia, maybe. But paranoia is often just awareness that hasn't been validated yet. Home, I went straight to the drawer. Unlocked it. The notebook. A letter. The record. I laid them out on the desk like evidence in a case no one else was allowed to see. I read everything again. Not as the woman who wrote it, but as someone discovering it for the first time. And that's when I understood the full weight of it. The secret wasn't explosive because of what it revealed. It was explosive because of who it implicated. People I had trusted. Decisions made without my consent. Moments in my career that were framed as personal failings but were, in truth, strategic sacrifices. The narrative wasn't just incomplete, it was curated. And if this ever came out, it wouldn't just change how people saw me. It would expose how the system worked. No wonder they were scared. The phone rang. I didn't answer. It rang again. Still nothing. The third time I picked up. "Whitney," a voice said softly. Not an executive. Not a manager. Someone closer. Someone who knew too much. "They're trying to reach me," I said. "I know," they replied. "They reached me too." My stomach dropped. "What did you say?" "I said nothing," they answered. "But I won't lie to you. They're not backing down." "Neither am I said. Then carefully. "If this gets out, it will change everything." "I know," I said. "That's why it matters." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet and made the hardest decision of my life. I finished the letter. Not vague. Not poetic. Clear. Precise. I didn't write it for sympathy. I wrote it for accuracy. For history. For the version of myself that deserved to be understood without distortion. When I was done, I sealed it. Not for today. For when silence would no longer protect anyone. As I placed the letter back in the drawer, a sudden thought froze me in place. What if the reason the pressure had intensified wasn't because they feared I would speak, but because they feared I wouldn't live long enough to stop them from controlling the story? The room felt colder, the walls closer, and for the first time, fear wrapped itself around my resolve. 'Cause if I was right, then the secret wasn't just dangerous. It was urgent, and time, real time, might be the most powerful enemy of all. Morning arrived quietly, like it didn't want to interrupt me. Light slipped through the curtains and rested on the floor, gentle and indifferent. I watched it from the edge of the bed, listening to my own breathing, slower now, steadier than it had been in weeks. Fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply settled into something more manageable, something honest. Clarity has that effect. I knew what I needed to do. Not loudly, not dramatically, deliberately. I dressed without calling anyone. No assistants, no entourage. Just me and the version of myself that existed before the world learned how to look at me. I made coffee and didn't drink it. Some habits are more about grounding than consumption. I opened the drawer one last time. The notebook. The record. A letter. I held the letter in my hands longer than the others. It felt heavier now, as if it understood what it was meant to become. Not a confession. Not an apology. Boundary. I thought about all the times I had been told to wait. To soften. To adjust. To let things pass. I had done that for years, sometimes out of wisdom, sometimes out of fear. But waiting only works when time is neutral. Time, I had learned, rarely is. I made arrangements quietly. Legal, precise, intentional. I placed the truth where it could not be altered, edited, or erased. Only revealed. Not by rumor. Not by enemies. But intact. Whole. Exactly as I had lived it. The strange thing was how calm I felt afterward. As if my body finally understood that it wasn't carrying the weight alone anymore. Later that day, I went for a walk without security. Sunglasses on, head down. Just another woman moving through the city. People passed me without recognizing me, and for once, that anonymity felt like freedom. I thought about the young version of myself. The girl who believed that if she sang beautifully enough, the world would be kind in return. She wasn't wrong. She just didn't know kindness wasn't guaranteed. Still, I didn't regret believing. Belief had carried me through rooms that tried to shrink me. Through expectations that tried to define me before I defined myself. Through moments when silence felt safer than truth. But belief also taught me this. You don't owe the world every part of you. Only the parts you choose to give. That evening, I stood by the window again, watching the city breathe. The pressure I'd felt for so long, the hum, the urgency, the invisible countdown had softened. Not because the danger was gone, but because I had met it on my own terms. Whatever happened next, the story would not be incomplete. It would not be stolen. It would not be rewritten without resistance. I knew there would be consequences. There always are when you refuse to be convenient. But I also knew something else now. something deeply grounding. I had already won the most important battle. I had reclaimed authorship. If one day people read the letter, they would see a woman. Not an icon, not a headline, but a human being who loved fiercely, trusted deeply, and learned painfully. They would see the context behind the choices, the reasons behind the silences, the strength behind the vulnerability. And maybe they would understand that survival sometimes looks like restraint, until it looks like truth. I closed the curtains and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, I slept without rehearsing explanations in my head, without imagining how others might interpret me, without preparing for impact. Whatever the world would discover someday, it would discover it honestly. And that was enough. Some truths aren't hidden because they're shameful. They're hidden because they're powerful. This story reminds us that owning your narrative can be the bravest act of all. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications to never miss the next story.